Romans chapter 6 is where we're up to today. We're going through Paul's letter to the Romans. And this is such an important and foundational doctrinal letter. And it's very important, I think, that we could understand, should understand what he has to say here. Paul had a revelation from Jesus, and Jesus sent him specifically to people like us. People who are Gentiles, people who are not under the old covenant, people who would have otherwise been excluded or outsiders. And Paul was sent with information from Jesus for us. And you can tell from when you read this that he's got a lot on his mind and a lot on his heart, and he's trying and is succeeding, I think, in delivering that message to us, which I think if we can get a hold of it is one of the most important things that we can learn and find out to help us to be successful in our Christian life. Because just to be honest with you, what most people, I think, try to do in their Christian life is try to live it and be as successful as they can just with sort of instinctive spiritual knowledge. But we need something more than just instinctive knowledge. We need revelation from the Lord. And this is what this epistle to the Romans is full of. Now, at the end of chapter 5, he concluded with this marvelous, we might say, description and preaching and proclamation of the grace of God. And it just built up to a tremendous climax at the end of chapter 5 when if we could begin, Elliot, with chapter 5 and verse 21. He has been talking about, for several verses, about how Adam sinned and put all of mankind on the outs with God. But then Jesus came and undid that and turned it around, and that was the grace of God, made the grace of God available to everyone. Verse 21 says, "As sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ." Last week I just now remembered we didn't have the computer and everything. All the boys were gone. Anton was gone, and I didn't get to read this to you from the message. Ellie, go back give me the message in chapter 5, verse 18. Go back to verse 18 in the message. Listen to this. This is really great. Here it is in a nutshell. Just as one person did it wrong and got us in all this trouble with sin and death. Now please consider what he's saying. He's talking about Adam. So just like Adam, the one person, did it wrong and got us all in this trouble with sin and death, another person did it right and got us out of it. But more than just getting us out of trouble, he got us into life. And that's a beautiful way of saying it. And this is important as we come to chapter 6 to remember what he's already said in chapter 5. He said the point he was making in chapter 5 is Adam fouled things up. Adam did it wrong. Adam sinned and conveyed onto the whole human race a nature of sin. Now what that means is a human nature from Adam that has we might say, a tendency or a propensity or by nature to do things wrong, because Adam did it wrong and handed that down to us. But as Christians, we're no longer in Adam. Now we're in Christ. We're grafted into Christ. We're joined to Christ. And on the inside of us, as we sang this morning, when we sang I Got Something on the Inside, we've got a new nature. And the new nature doesn't have a propensity to sin. The new nature doesn't want to sin. The new nature, I would say, this is, I'll go out on a limb, the new nature can't sin. There's no connection. It's Christ on the inside. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now, where Christians have trouble is not with what's on the inside, with what's still on the outside. Because on the outside, we are a body of flesh. Right? Am I right about that? And the flesh is what gets us into trouble, and an unrenewed mind that thinks along the lines of the flesh. So in chapter 6, what Paul is going to try to convey to us, what it's all about is the attitude that we have, the way we think. And he's calling for, and he's looking for, what we sometimes call in pop culture a paradigm shift, a total shift of thinking, a totally new way of looking at things. And it is remarkable. Now, chapter 6 begins this way. And Ellie, you can go back to the King James now. "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound?" Now, he's referring back to chapter 5, verse 21, where he said, "As sin hath reigned," that's past tense, "unto death, even so might grace reign." To reign means to rule. You see, reign and ruling. So that's what this is about. So then he says, well then, if grace abounds, where sin abounds, grace much more abounds. Should we just continue to sin that grace may abound? Now what Paul is doing here, he's putting forward an argument probably made by some of his critics. Now, Paul, if you haven't figured it out by now, after 5 chapters, is a preacher of grace. He believes in and he's preaching the grace of God. But what happens is when you preach the grace of God, lots of people object to it. And the reason people object to it is it makes them afraid. And the reason it makes them afraid is they think, here's what people, and I've heard it myself, well, you're just giving people a license to sin. And the truth of the matter is, sin is going to go on, license or no license. There's unlicensed sin going on, whether you give them a license or not. And see, grace does not give people a license to sin because they're sinning without a license. Grace is actually the only way out of it. Grace is, and the fact that some people could, and it's possible to abuse it, that doesn't do away with the fact that it's still the only way out. It's like, I liken it to a person who's stuck in a mud hole, and so I throw them a rope to pull, and the intent for which I threw them the rope is to help them pull them out of the mud hole. That's what grace is. Now, a person that's silly, they could take that rope and fiddle around with it and tie it around their neck and choke themselves. Did you know you could choke yourself with a rope? Now, don't do it. Please don't do that. That's not what the rope is for. The rope is for you to pull them out of the mud, and for me too. That's what the intent of it is. But the very fact that a person could abuse it doesn't do away with the fact that that's the only way out. You see, and what a lot of preachers do, and I shouldn't tell you this, so don't tell anybody I told you this. What a lot of preachers do, they're afraid. They're afraid of the fact that somebody might abuse it or somebody might do something wrong, and so they just kind of water it down or don't preach it at all. And the other option then is to keep people afraid. And see, the message of grace, the intent of it is to take away the fear. And to take away the fear where you're afraid of God and you're afraid to draw near to God. To take away the fear of retribution. To take away the anxiety. And see, what some preachers would think is, well, if I take away all of those things that keep people afraid and take away all of that anxiety, then they'll just go wild. You see, but the only way that you can really see what God is committed to grace, by the way, God, and He won't deal on any other grounds today. In the new covenant, that's the way God works with us, is by grace. And the reason is because He wants a free and a real, a true love relationship with us. And let me tell you something: a love relationship cannot exist in an atmosphere of fear. It's not love if there's fear. If there's any fear, if there's any anxiety, if there's any fear of retribution, it's not love. It's like this. Picture with me for a minute. Let me draw you a little picture. Picture a terrible man, an abusive husband, and he takes a gun and he puts it to his wife's head and he pulls back the hammer and he says, "Now, honey, let me ask you a question. Do you love me?" "Oh, yeah, I love you." "Yes, yes, you better believe," while that gun is at her head. That's not love, is it? Is it? No. Is it? It's not, is it? It's not love while there's fear. You see, Alice and I were talking about Martin Luther earlier in the week, and I've read a lot of Martin Luther's writings, and I find him an intriguing person. And he found that in his life, before he discovered the grace of God, before he understood it and found out about it, by the way, from reading in Romans primarily, before he found out about it, he said, and this is his testimony, that he tried to do all the right things. And he tried to live the right kind of life and tried to live according to what he perceived a right life to be. But he, being a very insightful and an honest person, he realized that in his heart of hearts, the only reason he was doing it was because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't do it. And he said, I suddenly realized I was doing it for the wrong reason, not because I truly loved God, but because I was afraid of God. And it caused him to feel totally condemned because he wasn't really loving God. And he said, if I was honest with myself at that time, I didn't really love God at all. I feared Him. I was afraid of Him. I thought He was getting ready to throw me into hell for one transgression, and I was gone. When he discovered the grace of God, however, he discovered that what God wanted was to set him free from all of that fear and all of that anguish and all of that anxiety and allow him to return His love in the same spirit in which it's given. John tells us that we love Him because He first loved us. That's what we're doing. Listen to that. We love Him because He first loved us.